Welcome, everyone. We are very excited to have you here for Dr. David Blustein's webinar titled Mental Health and Work-Based Implications for Work and Unemployment in the Time of COVID-19. My name is Annalise Singh. I'm currently serving as the president of Division 17, the Society of Counseling Psychology, and we are beyond thrilled to have Dr. Blustein with us today. Dr. Blustein is a professor in the Department of Counseling, Developmental, and Educational Psychology at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development at Boston College. David is the author of The Psychology of Working, a new perspective for career development, counseling, and public policy. And wow, are we excited about his next book, the recently published The Importance of Work in an Age of Uncertainty, the Eroding Experience of Work in America. Dr. Blustein has contributed to journal articles. You may have seen him recently cited in the New York Times. He's written book chapters and engaged in advocacy work on unemployment, integrative mental health, and work-based interventions, and as well as worked on the psychology of working theory, decent work, precarious work, relationships in work, and other aspects of the role of work in people's lives. So to have time with Dr. Blustein is just a treat. I want to turn it over to him to give people a quick orientation to the webinar today. Feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box, and there's a chat box. So I'll be dropping some links there. We'll be running some polls, and we hope you really enjoy this webinar. Dr. Blustein, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Annalise. It's a pleasure to be here. And as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, this is a particularly important webinar because counseling psychology has been my professional home for decades. And this is the community I identify with, I feel most connected with, and I believe that what I'm going to present to you today has enormous relevance to our work, to the future of our work, and to the liberation psychology perspective, Annalise, that you have made the centerpiece of your platform, which I resonate with very powerfully. So let me go over the agenda. I'm going to talk about the crisis within a crisis, the unemployment crisis, which I will show you some statistics just briefly. It's daunting, but I'm also going to share some personal narrative material with you as well. I'll also talk about unemployment and mental health. I'll give you an introduction to psychology of working theory, which I have connected the practice and systemic implications to this unemployment crisis. And I think it'll give us an opportunity to really think about what we can do. I'm going to try to provide you in 45 minutes, I hope I can do it, with some hands-on ideas about how we could intervene both for individuals and at the systemic level. And I will look forward to your questions in the last 15 minutes. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to this. So the crisis within a crisis, I mean, what we've experienced here is profoundly painful. COVID-19, clearly a game-changing illness. If you've been following the news, which is hard not to do, we know that this disease is devastating. We've just lost a number of people in our field, Jean Chin being the one who really affected me the most in the last 2 days. We've lost people in our families. We have members in our communities who have this. We know how serious this virus is. It's a game-changing illness. So the intervention that seems to be working now is physical distancing. Physical distancing is hard. Some of the consequences include loneliness, isolation, and then in relation to the theme of this webinar, a highly constricted economy and really extensive unemployment. So let me go over that unemployment phenomenon here with you. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this graph I actually got from 538, which is a very good resource for labor and political macro level data. So this shows us what happened here. In April, our unemployment rate went up to 14.7%, and according to 538, if it included all those who were absent from work, the BLS, this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is a United States-based agency, government agency. the rate would have been nearly 5 points higher. So we're looking at an unemployment rate of 20%. And it's probably going to be higher when the June data come out. This unemployment statistic obscures the unequal society that I believe this unemployment, the COVID crisis, has served to uncover. As Annalise said to me earlier, it's a very revealing crisis because it has revealed a massive maldistribution of resources. These are the data from also the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Women have a higher unemployment rate than men. And we could see the racial divide here in looking at the unemployment rate, with Latinx adults experiencing basically 19% unemployment, Blacks 16.7%, and whites at the 14.2% range. The COVID crisis has ruptured an already unequal and eroding world of work, which I'll speak about here in some depth. My last 2 months, I've been thinking deeply about this. Been working very hard. In fact, I've had this observation that I'm working so hard, I don't know how I fit in commuting time. That it's just, I know a lot of us are in this boat of having so many things hit us at once. So one of the ways in which I've thought about work during this period is, excuse me, through a tripartite kind of conceptualization. We have essential workers working in the storm of the virus. We have large numbers of unemployed people, which I fear will get even larger. And then we have people who are working remotely. And that's a whole nother set of issues. And we know that people working remotely are struggling with blurred boundaries. Very, very challenging time for people who have kids at home, people who are doing care work at home. However, and it's hard to find any kind of silver lining here, but I will work hard to do that. And I think one of the silver linings is it gives us an opportunity and an obligation to rethink how we work. This is a current picture of people waiting online at an unemployment office. The new reality, masks 6 feet apart, and the reality which has been with us for 20 years, people looking at their phones, this is a very sad photo. So let me talk about what this unemployment crisis has wrought. So yes, the lockdown, my view, a needed intervention. I do have some systemic ideas about how we can manage the going back, opening up again. I think it needs to be done in a very, very titrated way. And as I'll speak toward the end, workers need to be provided with support, not just a listing of job openings, but financial support, sustainability level support. So the fault line here is that the diminished worker protections over the last 40 years with the advent of a neoliberal economy have really left workers very vulnerable. And this has been a particularly big problem in the United States. As we've seen across our peer nations, most countries have done a much better job of keeping people in their jobs, of providing funds for employers and for workers so that not all these people are being fired. And this is not a radical solution. It's a moral solution. I'll have other solutions which you may consider radical, which I endorse as well. But this one, we are out of step with our peer nations in not providing support for working people. So one of the questions that is going to kind of flow through this part of the webinar is the relationship between unemployment and psychological and social impacts. One of the questions that's come up, I remember hearing about this issue back when I was a graduate student. Does unemployment cause mental health problems, or are those with mental health problems more likely to become unemployed? This has been a very kind of critical question in our field. However, as you'll see, I believe that question has been resolved quite convincingly. Another question is, what are the most effective individual and systemic interventions to shore up clients for the long haul of getting back to work, becoming critically conscious, and restoring their mental health? So, excuse me. The answer to the first question about work and mental health and unemployment and mental health was answered in a very compelling way in a highly cited meta-analysis published in the Journal of Vocational Behavior in 2009 on the relationship between unemployment and mental health. And this study integrated 237 studies with nearly 500,000 participants across 26 nations. And their results were unequivocally compelling and strong. And I think very sad as well. People who lost their jobs experienced an increase in mental health problems. Once people became reemployed, their mental health improved. So if we dig down a little deeper into this meta-analysis, we can see here that mental health problems exist in 16% of the general population and 34% of the unemployed. So Paul and Moser actually demonstrated with their meta-analysis of longitudinal studies that the fact that returning to a job, a decent job, that was a major factor in ameliorating the mental health problems, really demonstrated that unemployment is a causal factor in mental health problems. And that alternative hypothesis was one that, in my view, blamed victims. So unemployment is a major, major cause of mental health problems. And actually, a colleague in Finland sent me a study yesterday, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, demonstrating that unemployment also has a very, very adverse effect on our physical health. So Paul and Moser's meta-analysis also indicated that mental health problems are more pronounced among men, among blue-collar workers, and among the long-term unemployed. Long-term unemployed in this meta-analysis was people who were unemployed for 6 months or more. I've seen that in my clinical work as well, where I have over the years specialized in working with long-term unemployed people. If they're out of work for that period of time, not everybody's going to have a mental health problem. It's not like a one-to-one correlation, but you're certainly more predisposed. And we'll talk about what some of the protective factors are in the intervention part of this. So I want to enter this space during different parts of this webinar of people's lived experience. And this is a quote from somebody who I interviewed for my book, who described this was, of course, my book, the most recent book was written before the pandemic. As you'll see, I think it has a lot of relevance now. This is a person who described going into work. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read a little bit of it to you and talk about what kind of meaning it has to me. So this was after the 2001 recession, and he talked about his experience of being laid off. And he indicated that I go into work that day and I'm fearing that all these people are going to be fired. At no point did I think that I was going to be one of them. What happened was they brought in the police. This is how people have gotten laid off over the years in the United States. There were 3 police cars outside the building. Our managers went around the building, and your manager would come to your desk and say, so-and-so wants to see you. They just did it in order. They didn't do it at all at once. They did it in order. He did it with one of my friends who I knew was on the list, and he did it with the other guy who I also knew was on the list. It took maybe 5 minutes, and they came back and they give you a box, pack up your stuff, disable your computer, show you out the door. They did it with this participant as well. The next thing he knew, he was the one who was being selected. And he made this point, which I found so powerful, is I can honestly say that it was the most difficult time in my life. It was even more difficult than being diagnosed with cancer because it affected so many people. So for me, this quote brings to mind that very powerful poem by Martin Niemöller, who wrote this. He's a German theologian who wrote this poem during World War II about how they were coming after certain groups, the Nazis were coming after certain groups, and people kept thinking it wasn't going to be them. So this quote really brings that kind of experience to mind, and I think it affects us in our hearts as well as our heads. So developing solutions. I propose we need to ramp up our intervention strategy. There are a lot of counseling psychologists on this webinar. There's a lot of my close friends who I hope are on this webinar, and I think a lot of you know this, that our field, counseling psychologists, have a particularly unique skill set to deal with this crisis because we have skills in mental health and we have skills in career development and psychology of working. we have the needed skills to really focus on this. And we also have skills in social justice and systemic interventions. So a useful lens, I think, for this intervention strategy I'm going to present is the psychology of working. So I'm going to go over some of the principles of psychology of working here, and then I will move into the section on interventions. So psychology of working has been designed to be very inclusive. In the first article I wrote about it in 2001, I argued that we needed to expand our view. The vocational psychology world had become almost exclusively focused on career. And in this particular issue, I do acknowledge a great mentor to me and a great influence, Mary C. Richardson, who wrote an incredible article in 1993 on work as a location for counseling psychologists. And she was one of the first ones to put this idea on the table that we need to focus more broadly than folks who were engaged in the grand career narrative, people who had some degree of choice, some degree of volition in their lives. I've also argued that a psychology of working perspective and theory could focus on the full range of work-related issues, not limited to career choice and development, which would argue that our work with the unemployed would focus on a broad range of psychosocial issues. And that we also needed to engage in integrative perspectives that would involve mental health issues, systemic issues, and work-related issues. And more recently, last year, my colleagues, Ryan Duffy, Maureen Kenny, and Kelsey Otten and I wrote a paper on psychology of working as a theory of change, which is the premise of our intervention strategy, which I'll get to shortly. So the assumptions of psychology of working include these. I've condensed them for the sake of time: that work is a central aspect of life and mental health. The psychological study of working includes everyone who works and who wants to work, and that work and non-work experiences are actually seamlessly intertwined in the natural course of people's lives. I can remember leaving graduate school, Teachers College at Columbia, and starting my first faculty job at University at Albany. And diving into the career development literature actually as a researcher. I did my dissertation on it, but I really started this deep dive in it in the late 1980s. And I felt like the way the literature was presented was decontextualized, and it did not attend to the reality of people's lives. Because I've also been a practicing psychologist doing psychotherapy and career counseling, work-based interventions for many decades. And the way my clients presented their issues was not in this insular way that we as a profession were dealing with them. Other assumptions include that that working can take place both in the marketplace and in caregiving context. Here again, I give a great deal of credit to Mary C. Richardson, who has written brilliantly about care work and personal care work, unpaid care work, the gendered nature of care work, which I've written about in my recent book. Psychology of working also embeds its conceptualizations in cultural and relational contexts. So it has a very strong social justice, racial justice thread running through it. And psychology of working, in my view, has the capacity to enrich existing theories. We have, since my book came out in 2006, the work has become transformed, which I'll speak about. But I do believe that it's a complementary set of ideas that can be used with other perspectives: psychotherapy theories, social change perspectives, as well as career development perspectives. So optimally, working can fulfill a number of core human needs, which is what I'm going to go over now. And one of the things that I did in this initial writing on this issue is to outline core human needs that I believe can promote well-being. So this was a rather parsimonious taxonomy of 3 sets of needs. First one being need for survival and power. Second one being the need for relatedness and social contribution. And the third, the need for self-determination. I've again condensed these needs. Some of you who are in our field may already know this work. So one of the important pieces for me of psychology of working is I wanted to put working towards survival as a major issue. In fact, in that New York Times article that Annalise mentioned, my dear friend and colleague Ryan Duffy was quoted talking about how essential survival is, and that when you don't have your survival needs met, that's your whole picture of life. It's hard to think about other things. And here we give credit, of course, to Abraham Maslow, who wrote so beautifully about the need for survival, which as the career development field kind of got caught up in this myth of massive social mobility, we kind of forgot the core aspect of survival and power. Here in this slide, I'll talk about this power issue. In writing my book, early to mid 2000s, I got really interested in the anthropology of work. And I really enjoyed this work of going deep into this area and thinking about how work evolved in our societies. So work basically was essential for human survival. I mean, the first name of our species, of the first era that people really recognized, was the hunter-gatherer period, which is interesting, the two most important jobs in terms of survival. And as societies became more complex, more multifaceted, around 10 to 15,000 years ago, agriculture began, which seems like it was a good idea to not have to keep walking around to try to find food. But as people moved from these hunter-gathering lifestyles to agricultural lifestyles, the concept of land ownership emerged. And with that, issues of power, economic and social power, emerged in human society. These issues are clearly still with us and are manifested very powerfully in this current crisis. The second function focuses on the role of work in providing people with a means of social connection. Here I was building on the relational perspectives in our field, psychology, touching on relational cultural theory. I was informed by the relational psychoanalytic theories, by attachment theory, with this fundamental notion that we are hardwired for close contact with people and for connection. Again, a lot of us are experiencing the loss of that in this current lockdown state. Related to the social relatedness piece, social connection piece, is social contribution, which is the idea that work provides us with a connection to the broader social world. By being able to work, we can contribute to the overall functioning of our society. This, again, is powerfully illustrated during this COVID era when we think about, and I am very, very heartened by the way we are affirming people in these essential jobs, people who have been invisible to us, not to everyone, but to many of us, postal workers, delivery people, grocery store clerks. We now see them as essential. And I do hope that this is a sea change for us. And I have some ideas, as we'll talk later, about how we could really dignify what they do. Because we wouldn't be surviving without them. Need for self-determination. This would be the area of the psychology of working theory that really captures the aspects of career development that many of you may have learned in your classes about, or in your training about trying to develop a work life of meaning and purpose that is congruent with your personality type, that is congruent with your values. I used here DC and Ryan's self-determination theory, and I've been involved with that theory for years. What attracted me to it actually was the literature on how people can internalize and how they can internalize extrinsically motivating activities. And I thought that using that literature was a way to have us as psychologists and social scientists create more meaningful, dignified work conditions for people who were in jobs that weren't necessarily intrinsically interesting. And actually, DC and Ryan have been working on that issue and their colleagues for decades. And they came up with this evidence-based perspective of supportive conditions for self-determination, which include competence, relatedness, and autonomy. And their view is that if you have these attributes in the workplace, even if you're doing something that's not necessarily that interesting to you, you have a better opportunity to internalize that work and to have it feel integral to your values and to your identity. So now we're going to move from these main aspects of psychology of working theory to this notion of psychology of working as a theory of change. So in the last few years, my colleagues and I have been thinking about how to take the ideas and research findings from the psychology of working movement and have them inform change in a way that was, to have them inform change-based practices and interventions. And I started to delve into this concept of a theory of change, which I'd heard about, many of you have heard about this. And I looked into this and I read about it in depth, and I came away thinking, well, psychology of working fits beautifully with this notion of a theory of change. So I think that the basic idea here is that most social science theories focus on explaining and predicting phenomenon. A theory of change focuses also on coming up with a knowledge base that's going to inform change practices. And we're thinking here of change practices both for individuals and systems. So let me go over this theory of change model. This is detailed actually in an article last year in the Career Development Quarterly. We wanted to put this article out there in the world of career practitioners who we felt would really resonate with this. And we hope that counseling psychologists and other psychologists would also see this article in their travels, their academic travels and practice-oriented travels, which are now basically travels from home on the internet. So we propose that change can be manifested individually and systemically, and we hope to create knowledge that would identify predictors of outcomes across a wide range of issues. So let me just, I kind of left out an important step here on my slides, which is that in 2016, right, with Ryan Duffy at the lead, we presented a psychology of working theory, a more delineated linear model in the Journal of Counseling Psychology. The article included Ryan Duffy, Kelsey Otten, and Matt Deemer. And in this article, this article actually fueled an enormous amount of empirical research. I'm forever grateful to my colleagues, two of whom are my former students, for convincing me to go along with this. And I'm glad I did. That article was a game changer for our field, and that article also is a game changer for the kind of interventions we could provide for unemployed people. So our view in this theory of change note article is that practices have not adequately addressed needs of poor and marginalized clients, thinking of career practice, practice focused on unemployment, and that PwC, we've developed two change paradigms here: psychology of working counseling and psychology of working systems intervention. So with PwC, the idea here for this purpose is to focus on the full breadth of issues related to work and unemployment. So there's two phases to this change model, and there's two domains. And we kept this as a parsimonious model that people could use in addition to other perspectives, although they could also use it as a freestanding change paradigm. So we focused on the need for a needs assessment and then change mechanisms. And we also proposed the same taxonomy of needs and the same taxonomy of change factors as being relevant to both individuals and systems. So let me go over first the needs assessment. Like any good work as in systems change or counseling, we want to make some decisions about what are the main issues that are causing a particular problem. And we applied that needs taxonomy to kind of an open-ended assessment model. Here's the table from the article, that 2019 article, that gives you some examples of how we understand survival, how the survival needs would be manifested in systems change, and how it would be manifested in individual implications. Same for social connection, and the same for self-determination. Okay, I'll give you a second to take that in. Now let's turn our attention to agentic action. Agentic action is a term that is used a lot in our field. I think about here, Mary Sue Richardson has written about this, and also Lent, Brown, and Hackett, who have written really very important work on agentic action and agency. And in fact, their whole social cognitive career theory in some ways is about helping to foster agency. It's been a big influence for me. So agentic action is, again, derived from a synthesis of literature on psychotherapy, on career development, and on psychology of working-based interventions. The role of macro-level factors is essential. That's one of the main takeaways for psychology of working, is that we foreground economic constraints and marginalization. So we argued that there were three integrative clusters that would guide change mechanisms for individuals and systems. Here we have a similar looking table where we list the three clusters, one of them being proactive engagement, which kind of captures some of the traditional goals that vocational and counseling psychologists work on with their clients, trying to help people be proactive, trying to help them to adapt, trying to help them to get engaged, to activate themselves. And we give examples here of systemic context for this, as well as individual context. Critical reflection and action is a key aspect of psychology of working. And we have infused the work of Paulo Freire throughout the 20 years that psychology of working's been around. I've been thinking about this critical consciousness notion for even longer. And here's some examples of how it can be used in systems interventions, confronting anti-union ideology of neoliberalism, and an individual example I'm going to go over in particular depth, because critical reflection and action is fundamentally important in our work with unemployed individuals. And the third cluster is social support and community engagement, which captures this idea that people do need social support. It's part of the air that we breathe. And I gave examples here systemically of creation of worker circles, which is a kind of alternative to labor unions. It's used a lot for domestic workers and other service workers. And then in individual counseling, of course, we all know and use this notion of providing people with emotional instrumental support. So I'm going to now give examples of these clusters, these agentic action clusters in relation to unemployment. And this will give me a chance to talk about some of the interventions I've used over the years. So in terms of working with unemployed clients, what does the evidence tell us? Well, the evidence tells us that that it's really important for people to engage in a job search. I think it's a mistake for our society to provide only job search support. People who are unemployed are facing psychosocial crises, are facing enormous loss. In fact, I believe this period is going to be one of such grief and mourning that it will parallel the experiences we've had as a nation after the 2 world wars. That there's going to be so much loss of life, coupled with so much loss of work and so much loss of social contact, that we are going to need to do wraparound comprehensive interventions with our clients and with our communities. So the job search is clearly important. There are evidence-based, there's a meta-analysis actually from 2014 of what job search strategies work. I've referenced it in a lot of my recent articles, particularly the counseling psychologist article on vocational psychology. It came out in TCP, references that study. Identifying transferable skills is critical. Learning what the world needs. It's a more utilitarian approach, but right now with unemployment being so high, people do need to think about survival. Also focusing on exploration and planning, and there's so much more that we can do. And one of my goals for this webinar is to stimulate more writing and research and sharing of our practices of what's working. Critical reflection and action. This is critical. There's a very important finding about unemployment from a book written by a colleague and friend of mine, Ofer Sharon, who wrote a book in 2014 called Flawed Systems, Flawed Self. And he's a sociologist, and he did a very extensive qualitative study of unemployment, both here and in Israel. And what he found is that Americans tended to engage in considerable self-blame in unemployed, when they became unemployed. This wasn't the case for Israelis. Israelis were able to kind of project that out to the system. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Cultures are different. A lot of cultural and, other issues that are different, but there's also a lot of similarities between these two countries. So I think that, and there's evidence to support this, that critical consciousness can be a powerful antidote to the self-blame that people are likely to engage in, which I think could lead to more depressive symptoms. It could also encourage us to engage in advocacy. And I think it could really provide us with an enormous set of tools. Like all interventions focusing on critical consciousness, it's important that we do this in a very nuanced way, and we work with where the client is. And I'm sure there's been a lot of discussion in our community on how to do this work in an effective and empathic way, so that we don't become like doesn't become like an ideological debate, but it becomes a way of supporting people. The third the third cluster is social support and community engagement. And in the unemployment context, we could think here of the importance of networking. In my work with unemployed clients over the years, one of the things I've done with them is to ask them to come back to the next session with a list of everyone they know. Now, everyone they know well enough to kind of contact. I mean, if people come back with a 500 person list of Facebook friends, if they really know that many people, that's great. But most of us would come back with a smaller list. And the goal here is to use this classic intervention of networking to find work. And one of the tools for that is LinkedIn, which is a great social media platform for job seekers. But I also use it to help people deepen personal relationships. I think it's really critical for people to develop and enhance their relationships during periods of unemployment. One of the issues that comes up is shame and isolation, and having connection is a great antidote to that. In terms of community engagement, when I work with my students in practicums and training them in career development, psychology of working, they'll often say to me, I can't really do this work. I don't know that much about the labor market. Well, you know what? None of us really knows that much about the labor market in its entirety. It's all in there on the internet. You don't need to really know it all. And we also have access throughout the United States in one-stop career centers. There is a lot of variability in one-stop career centers, in part due to one of the first neoliberal interventions by Ronald Reagan, which was to privatize what used to be the United States Job Service, which used to have a master's level counselor or psychologist at all of its sites. And with that privatization came a lowering of professional requirements, although I will say that the people who work in these one-stops are incredibly talented. Some of them may be watching now, and I give them enormous credit. They're working super hard now. I have friends working at JVS in Boston, and they're working like 6 days, 7 days a week seeing people. So it's an amazing group of colleagues. It's free or low-cost services for people. And also community engagement can come about through support from institutions and communities. So how do we develop change in systems? So one of the first things we need to do is to come up with goals for what we want to change. And rather than focus on how to do the social change, which actually I will say there's a lot of leaders in Division 17 who've done an amazing job, Annalise and many others in the leadership community. So I'm going to hold off on the actual strategies. I'm going to focus on how do we develop goals for this. And I'm going to take the goals that I outlined in my book, which came out last summer. And this book was written as a professional book, but also a book that's hopefully of interest to lay readers. In fact, my wife is reading it now cover to cover, which is kind of cool. And she said it reads like a novel. Maybe not, it doesn't say that exactly, but I'm inferring it. So what this book included were results of extensive qualitative interviews of 58 people across the United States. I'm going to kind of go quickly to the end of this, where I develop conclusions and advice for our society to fight the sense of erosion in our workforce. So in terms of the conclusions of this book, which also included a review of pertinent literature, mostly recent literature on work, I was able to document that the psychological experience of work was very emotionally intense for people. Mind you, a lot of these interviews were done after the recession, when things were getting better, but also in the last few years when there was lower unemployment rates, but actually that was a deceptive statistic, but I don't have the time to get into that now. Bottom line here is that work is deeply felt by people. The issue of erosion emerged as I was going through these narratives with my grad students, and did a lot of it on my own, that is kind of reading these narratives over and over again. But people described a sense that the workplace was eroding. And I think they were referring to the impact of unemployment, interpersonal abuse, sexual harassment, racism, marginalization, unsafe working conditions. But what I noticed in a kind of profound way was this erosion was mirrored by the individuals with an internal sense of fragmentation and depletion in relation to what they were experiencing at work. It had a psychological impact on people. So this is something that I wrote in the chapter on unemployment that I remembered writing, and I wanted to include this because this is an interview of my reactions to doing this work. And I feel like it's important that I read it. Once people lose their jobs and or search for new work unsuccessfully, they become submerged in a world that offers no mercy. Being without work for many of the participants was like being without access to the core necessities of life, akin to a feeling of walking in a desert without water or food. This was one of the big takeaways in our chapter on unemployment. Okay, so the systemic change objectives that I was able to infer from this 6-year project are the following. A comprehensive safety net is needed. This safety net was never super strong in the US, but has been deteriorating for 40 years, in part through the loss of worker protections, which has been speeded up by the Trump administration, and in part due to the debilitating impact of neoliberalism on our unions. And the destruction of our unions, the strength of our unions, is in my view, one of the main factors that has contributed to the vulnerability of workers. I also believe that our society can create sufficient jobs. I don't believe that we have to adhere to a market-based economy. I'll go over that in the next slide. Governments need to regulate the neoliberal economy. This has been a big mistake. I write about this extensively in this book. This is one of the interesting points I had here, which is that I don't think that work needs to be focused so much on productivity. There's a movement in progressive circles to reinvent work and to not think about work as always having to enhance our gross national product, to really enhance, always to have the economy grow. I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to develop a humane economy that supports people. So we can disconnect productivity and consumerism from work. Infrastructure work is a short-term solution. It's not a long-term solution. Some long-term solutions include economically sanctioning caregiving work, provide people with pay for caring for others. And we do that to some extent when people are taking care of elderly relatives who have dementia, who ordinarily would be cared for in a nursing home. People are able to get funds for that. But I think we also need government-sponsored work to improve life for all. And we need to go back to Franklin Roosevelt approach of a New Deal. It's going to need to be done. The other thing we need to do, I don't know if I have in the next slide. No, let me go back here. I must have taken it out and trying to collapse things, is we do need to move to a basic income guarantees immediately. $1,200 here or there, it's not enough. And even the Andrew Yang idea of $1,000 is insufficient. I did read the New York Times this morning of a proposal put on actually by a conservative Republican and a progressive Democrat in the Congress, which has identified the a model of basic income guarantees where people would get 80% of their salary up to a maximum of $49,000 a year. Barely a living wage, but it's certainly better than $1,000 or $1,200. This is going to need to be done, and because I don't see this unemployment ending soon, in part because I don't see this COVID crisis ending soon. And then even after it does end, I am worried that employers will use this as an opportunity to to downsize their workforces and put people on more precarious work contracts. So there are concerns we will need much more protection, much more of an activist intervention by the government. We also need to identify and change the racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression that have made work toxic for so many. I've seen this with colleagues, experienced this in my therapy sessions with people, that the workplace is an environment where we're not selecting who we are associating with. And, you know, we're hanging out with people we may not have chosen to be with. And it's a place where there's been greater freedom for people to oppress others, particularly in the last 3 years. So I'm ending right about on time. So let me provide some closing comments. The participants were passionate and eloquent about their work lives. The reality of the lived experience of people was far more brutal than any of us, my students and I, expected to see here. The erosion was really disconcerting. And in terms of the current crisis, I think we need to, and I want to dedicate this presentation to honor those who've been lost to COVID and to those whose lives have been disrupted, those who are unemployed, who are in dire straits now. And I'm working really hard to try to honor them by doing as much work as I can to doing new research studies on this, developing intervention models. This is a calling for a lot of us, and it's a tragedy. We need to deal with this grief that has intertwined roots, and we will be needed to help our society pick up the pieces to create a more just, caring, and equitable world. So I want to thank you for your attention to this, and I do look forward to some questions.
Ah, that was so wonderful, Dr. Blustein. Thank you so much. We've got about 7 or 8 questions, so we'll see how we can move through them. And we ran a couple of polls just in terms of folks on the webinar who are working with clients or related to issues of unemployment and mental health. About half of attendees today are working with clients. And when we asked how many folks of our attendees had actually experienced mental health challenges related to unemployment, about 53% said yes. So just FYI, our first question is, do unemployed individuals who end up with mental health concerns who become reemployed return to their previous mental health levels, for instance, prior to when they were unemployed?
I think that's a good question. I think the aggregate data says if they end up in a decent job or they're changing careers to something they really want to do, yes. If they end up in a job that is less meaningful, pays less, that it's experienced as a kind of drop in their sense of where they were in the world of work, then the mental health problems might continue. But the meta-analysis from Paula Moser, and actually in that article in the New York Times, in the interview part with Ryan Duffy, there was a reference to an article that kind of provided more nuance to that. But in aggregate, yes, people do if the jobs are decent and dignified.
Thank you. All right, this question is about underemployment. Can you speak to underemployment? Is this trend of inequity the same for underemployment? Is the Mental Health Association also found with underemployment?
I would say the answer is yes. And I would refer people to the work of my friend Blake Allen, who's done some great work on underemployment, counseling psychologist. I think underemployment, again, it depends on the nature of it. And it depends on the degree to which these kind of core needs are compromised, the need for survival, social connection. But underemployment often is an option that people are taking because they don't have other options. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I have that same view about the gig economy. There's proponents of the gig economy. And if people, I don't know many people who say that I want to drive for Uber. Right. I want to do, open up my car, Airbnb. I want to open my home to people who I don't know. I mean, it's good in theory, but to do it every day.
Well, and we could do a whole webinar on the gig economy alone. Eleanor asked that trust, she says trust is key to all of this, given the important role of a workplace attachment security. Any ideas on ways that practitioners can foster a more trusting work environment in the face of the unique stressors of COVID-19? Great question.
Oh, that's an interesting question, because one of the issues around trust is how safe is that work environment if you're working at the site. So was that kind of part of the question, like this?
Yeah, just like if there are any tips you may have on how to, you know, COVID-19 is just flooding, obviously, the work environment in so many ways, especially for our frontline workers. And so are there ways to increase trust, given the important role of workplace attachment security is what Eleanor is asking.
That's a great, I mean, because we are, I mean, I think for those of us who are working remotely, and actually we're a privileged group because we still have our jobs. And even though there are a lot of stresses with this, I mean, us complaining about being tired of Zoom calls, it's a viable complaint, but we have tens of millions of people without work and not enough resources to survive. The issue of trust in returning to work, I'll take the question that way, is a very complicated one. Those of us who work at universities are kind of anxious about what these universities are going to expect from us. And I think some of us have read pieces in the media of, you know, university presidents saying we're going to return, we want it for the students, and there's barely a mention of older faculty, younger staff members who have pre-existing conditions, plus people who just don't want to get this kind of deadly disease. I mean, it is a big issue, and I think that issue of trust is a profound complication of this era. And I don't know how that's going to play out, but it's going to be a big goal for us as advocates for decent and dignified work to really insist that employers create safe environments for us.
Yeah, and it seems like, you know, people are really looking for leadership right now in work environments, and simply even saying, hey, we don't know, or, you know, trying to increase transparency and kind of saying, I'm scared too. I know that's not always what we want to hear from leaders at work, but I have seen that the leaders who have gone in that more honest direction have inspired trust, or, you know, found ways to hold virtual kind of homerooms or town halls where people could ask all the questions that everyone knows we may not have answer to or not. So I did love that question. From Abiola, her question is about implications for future training of career counseling providers in terms of the integration of mental health and vocational needs. Can you?
Great. I know Abiola. Hello.
Yeah, she's so wonderful. We love you, Abiola.
Great to hear from you. I think the training for career development and career counseling has needed to change, and I think it is changing with many of us. In my class, I actually train mental health counselors, and I train school counselors and counseling psychologists. There's a mental health thread going through that class. I think we're going to need to do much more of that. And I think, you know, we're going to need to think of different ways of training people to, particularly in the unemployment realm. The traditional, I mean, for some people who have a fair amount of volition and have high levels of skills in areas where there's a big market, yeah, I think the traditional idea of interest assessments or using the wonderful tool by Civicus and Hard Tongue, My Career Story would be great. But we're going to be dealing with people who are going to come to see us with survival needs. And that's partly why we developed this new counseling model, to really put a focus on those survival needs. And I think it's going to involve focusing on mental health, but also focusing on us acting as liaisons for our clients, connect them to people who can help with job search, things of that nature.
Awesome. Thank you. And we still, questions are coming in. We've got about 6. We'll see if we can get to them. Are you familiar with Stud Turkle's book on working? What about Gerald Celeste's position on the value of a college education in relation to employment?
I am familiar with Studs Terkel's book on working. In fact, one of my dreams of my book that just came out was to do something like that with a psychological frame. It's a hard goal because this book was amazing. The last part of the question was that, can you read that?
Yes, that was, what about Gerald Celeste's position on the value of a college education in relation to employment?
I don't think I know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And David, if you could retype that or clarify that a bit, that might help us. And this one's from Rosie. Have you implemented any of the examples of agentic actions listed in the slide? Any outcomes to report?
There are outcomes to report overall in the field based on these agentic action interventions. Some of them are from social cognitive career theory or from other bodies of work. I have not. That might be, is that Rosie Bingham?
Rosie Davis, yes.
Rosie Davis, I'm sorry. Hello, Rosie, good to hear from you.
How much do we love Rosie? Oh
love it, enormously, unequivocally. No, I haven't, but this summer, I'm trying to get through a very complicated semester, almost done with it. I am working hard to develop an intervention model that I am actually going to be speaking with people tomorrow. Somebody from Boston's Jewish Vocational Services, which is one of the best one-stop career centers in the country. I'm going to be field testing an integrative intervention, kind of structured intervention, hopefully get it going in the next few months.
Awesome.
At least some pilots for it. So I'm working on it now.
So about to come. Yeah, things and
coming down the road, hopefully.
Awesome. So this person says, Nikki, Dr. Blustein, I love your work, would like to find ways to incorporate these concepts into my work with community college students as both a faculty and potential researcher. Do you have any recommendations for how we can start these interventions early with students?
I do. I don't know if I could do it in a few minutes, but community colleges are a great place to use this kind of framework. I worked at a community college for 3.5 years before and during my doctoral program. It's a tremendously important place for me in every possible way. I think this work is well suited for it. And I think that the kind of meta perspective of this psychology of working counseling model, I think would fit well with community college, of doing this needs assessment early on using that table. And we haven't developed a more precise tool, but the needs assessment could kind of be done in the counselor's and psychologist's mind, and they could kind of write it out in their notes and try to use some of these strategies with community college students. I'm happy to consult with this person. They could write to me if they've, may not respond till next week though, but.
That's awesome. Well, and people are just giving you a lot of thanks for your work. Deborah is asking, what research have you found or exist on the impact on family members when someone is unemployed?
Actually, this research, I think that one person I know who's done great research on this is Mindy Thompson, University of Wisconsin in Madison, another great friend and colleague. The research indicates that family members experience vicarious traumatization at times. And it's actually a very big problem because for kids, particularly, they're scared.
Yes.
They're scared. I mean, when you hear that your parent has lost their job or your caregiver has lost their job, it's frightening. And it's also difficult for people who are in intimate partner relationships. We know there's been an uptick in marital conflict, in relational conflict during this period. And unemployment is a major stressor for couples conflict, as well as for the mental health of the whole family. It's a national crisis, really.
Yeah, this is huge. And I love that you said there's this unique role for counseling psychologists and how we can really support folks. So this is the last question. It's from one of your former students, Vicky Shivy.
Yes, nice to hear from you.
Wondering if the pandemic and employment-related sequelae might result in more and better connections between vocational psychology and occupational health psychology.
I think so. I think that, yeah, I mean, our fields are very insular, and Vocational psychology is kind of separate from occupational health psychology. IO psychology, these are all kind of, I think it should lead to greater integration. And I do hope that's one of the outcomes. I also think that, this is one of my deep hopes, is that for the counseling psychology students and practitioners who didn't find their career development classes too relevant and may have felt like, and I've seen some of these in course evals, like I didn't really need to take this class, I'm not going to do this work. That's after hearing from me for 4 months. Don't think it was disheartening. You know, I'm doing everything up there to be passionate about it. I hope that people will get it, that our profession, and I do want to make this comment, our profession in counseling and psychology has unique skills. We need to take leadership on this unemployment crisis and the mental health consequences of this unemployment crisis, because we know the vocational psych literature, we know literature on mental health. We've got a unique skill set, and I think we could help a great deal. And I think that occupational health psychology and IO psychology hopefully will turn to us as we get more work out there. I will say that there's been colleagues who've written papers in the American Psychologist. Mindy Thompson's one recently. Laura Smith wrote one on the living wage a few years ago. We're getting our work out there, and we're being seen more and more as leaders in this particular social justice focus on work and this integrative focus on work. It doesn't need to be psychology of working. It just needs to be effective, passionate, heartfelt work.
Love it. And I want to be respectful of your time. And do you have time for one more question?
I do, yeah. I didn't book anything after this.
You know, this one came from our current APA president, Sandy Schulman. So I feel like I got a commitment here. Yeah, we got to support
Sandy.
her.
Good to hear from
Sandy,
you.
thank you for all you're doing. I know she's doing a lot of webinars that have been wonderful too. She asks or says that I think there are going to be a fair number of unemployed persons at the executive level. Are there any issues specific to this situation?
Yes, there are. And actually the work of my friend Ofer Sharon, the occupational sociologist, he's focused on professional workers. And I do believe that we're going to see more and more layoffs there. You know, companies are going to tighten their belts, and we're going to see layoffs across the board here. And in terms of resources, I mean, typically what executives get access to are outplacement services. And, you know, that's a kind of an elite intervention for people that, you know, the companies are paying for or they could pay for it. I do think they may have access to these kinds of resources, but what I would love to see is Division 17, Society for Vocational Psychology, maybe a National Career Development Association, get together and develop some policy statements on what we need to do for all people who are losing their jobs, and to really make it a broad-based initiative where we can provide policy knowledge as well as practice interventions. There are a lot of interventions out there already. We don't need to reinvent things. We do have a lot that works well, but I do think that it would be good to kind of coalesce our professional groups and do some advocacy in this area. So Sandy, if you're interested, this might be something to work on, and I'd be happy to help if you're interested.
Yeah, President Schulman was definitely say we needed leadership there. And I know a lot of people have asked if the slides will be available. I did let them know the recording will be available. So I don't know if it's how you feel about that, but
I'm fine. I'll send you the slides, Annalise, and I'll also send you some articles, recent articles that cover these issues, including the one I referenced here, the one on the theory of change approach. So I'll send you 3 or 4 articles and these slides, and you can send them to everyone.
Awesome. And this really is going to be the last one. It feels important because it's about healthcare workers. So from Vanessa Downing, she says, our team works full-time in healthcare worker well-being. How can we help healthcare workers heal from the collective trauma they're facing and grow stronger in their connections to each other in the months and years to come? Wow.
Wow is right. Wow is right, because the healthcare workers are really heroes to us. And, you know, when I watch them interviewed on CNN, I mean, I'm well up in tears just watching them and what they're doing. It's remarkable. Mm-hmm. I think we need to do everything that we can do to honor their service, really, to really dignify what they've been doing, the stress of it, the anxiety of it, them being often the only person to sit with someone who's dying, to be their family members at that time. It is just so powerful that, yeah, I think that's something that we should try to do something for and about, and maybe create some goals for counseling psychologists and others to do some pro bono work with healthcare workers. And, you know, maybe if we organize that, that might really be something we could do. We're doing it from home.
Yes.
So,
Well, and there is a COVID-19 task force that ACTA, CCPTP, and Division 17 are all working on, and that group is about to do a survey of our counseling psychology members. And I know, you know, ACA, other groups have talked about providing emotional PPE. So I love that you're bringing that up, David. And if anyone is interested in participating in that, that special task group, it's a limited duration task group, but definitely they're looking for help and looking to serve the society in ways that are supportive, because we know our community is going through a lot right now. I mean, just even, I didn't run a poll about who's worried about academic and practice unemployment, but I know a lot of people's practices have been decimated. So yeah, well, David, just what an honor and privilege to always work with you. Folks, I want you to encourage you to get his book, to read his writings. Your work has been very important to me as a grad student, as an early career professional, now as a mid-career professional. So I just thank you for always being there and for being the counseling psychology that I grew up in. It means so much. And I want to let people know about our next webinar, also sponsored by the COVID-19 Task Force. It will be on aging, ageism, and intersectionality in the time of COVID-19 with Catherine Ramos, Maggie Syme, and Kate Henricks. It'll be a wonderful follow-up to this. David, I hope we get to talk with you more about this webinar today and this topic, and that we keep this conversation going.
absolutely. I thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I've been doing a lot of webinars lately. As I mentioned, this is the most important one. And it's really deeply meaningful to speak to my friends and colleagues about this issue. It's a sobering situation we're in. And I hope that you feel inspired to do some work in this area. Feel free to reach out to me. I've got a lot going on, but I really want to put some time into helping to mentor people who want to do some work in this area.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We had hundreds of people here, so obviously this is an important topic and speaks to the influence of your work. So we want to thank everyone for being here today and hanging with us a little later. Sending hugs to everyone, and thank you, David.
Thank you all.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.